A homeless beggar corrected a billionaire's mistake. What he taught him after hearing his cry will shock you. He was nothing but a homeless beggar, a man the world had written off as useless. Yet one stormy night, when a billionaire cried out in desperation after making a mistake that could destroy his empire, that beggar walked in and said three impossible words: "I can correct it." The rain lashed against the glass walls of Aerospace Dynamics Limited, turning the skyline of Lagos into a blur of shadows and lights. Inside the top-floor office, billionaire Johnson Uche sat alone at the head of a long conference table. His tie was loose, his face pale, and his hands trembled as they pressed against a pile of reports, all marked with the same word: failed. The autopilot flaw in his company's newest jet was a death sentence. Contracts worth billions were about to be cancelled. Rivals overseas were already mocking him in the press. Worst of all, he sensed betrayal from within. His executives, the very men he had trusted, had been whispering behind his back, plotting to sell secrets to competitors if the company collapsed. He stared at the rain streaking down the glass. For the first time in years, the proud billionaire whispered like a broken man. "God, if there is anyone who can help me, send them. Or I am finished." The words escaped into the night, echoing across the marble lobby, slipping past the revolving doors, and falling onto the empty street below. And someone heard. Emeka. He was sitting under a broken kiosk across the street, his body wrapped in rags that smelled of damp smoke. His beard was tangled, his hair matted, his eyes sharp but weary. Beside him lay a torn brown satchel, spilling with faded notebooks, filled with equations scribbled in pencil, diagrams that once belonged to dreams long stolen from him. To drivers passing by, he was nothing but another beggar. But tonight, those whispered words from the billionaire cut into him like lightning. He knew that voice. He knew that pain. And he knew the very mistake that had brought Johnson to his knees. Slowly, Emeka rose. The rain soaked his body, his shoes squelched in the mud, but he walked anyway, toward the tower that once employed him, the empire that had cast him out. At the glass doors, security guards stiffened. One barked, "Move along." Another shoved him back. But Emeka clutched his satchel tight to his chest. His voice, though tired, was firm. "I can correct it." The guards laughed. "Correct what?" "Go back to the gutter." One reached for his arm. Emeka stood his ground. His voice rose, cutting through the rain. "Tell Johnson Uche, I can correct it." Inside, Johnson lifted his head. He thought he was imagining things. But through the glass, he saw the struggle at the doors. A ragged man, drenched, clutching a satchel like treasure. Their eyes locked. And in that moment, Johnson felt something he hadn't felt in weeks, a flicker of hope. "Wait," he said, his voice low at first, then louder, "wait." The guards froze. Rainwater dripped from Emeka's chin. He didn't blink, didn't look away. The billionaire pointed directly at him. "Bring him in." The doors swung open, and for the first time in years, Emeka walked into the skyscraper lobby of Aerospace Dynamics Limited. The same building that had once carried his dreams now smelled of polished marble and cold betrayal. The guards shoved him forward, their eyes filled with disgust. The few junior staff who lingered in the lobby whispered behind their hands. "Why is he here? He looks like he hasn't bathed in weeks. Mr. Uche must be desperate." At the end of the room, the billionaire stood waiting. Johnson Uche's eyes scanned the beggar carefully, the ragged trousers, the worn satchel clutched like treasure, the notebooks bulging with faded equations. Something about the man's steady gaze unsettled him. Behind Johnson, a handful of executives had returned after their meeting. They froze when they saw Emeka. Mr. Bako, Johnson's deputy, chuckled under his breath. "Is this the genius who will save us? A madman from the street?" Laughter rippled across the room. The kind of laughter that cuts deeper than any blade. But Emeka didn't flinch. He lowered his satchel to the table, opened it slowly, and pulled out a notebook. The cover was soaked, the corners frayed, but the pages inside were filled with neat calculations. Equations about autopilot algorithms, wind shear resistance, and response times. The executives leaned closer, their smirks fading slightly. These weren't the ramblings of a madman. These were technical notes, detailed, precise, brilliant. Johnson narrowed his eyes. "Where did you get this?" Emeka met his gaze. His voice was low, steady. "I wrote them. Years ago. Before this company betrayed me." The word struck like a slap. The room fell quiet for a heartbeat, until Baco sneered, trying to reclaim control. "Nonsense. He's bluffing. Sir, let us escort him out before he embarrasses us further." But Johnson raised a hand. His instincts told him to wait. Something about this man, his confidence, his defiance in the face of humiliation, felt real. He pushed a marker across the polished table toward Emeka. "Show me." Gasps echoed in the room. "Sir, you can't be serious," one executive protested. "We can't waste time with a lunatic." But Johnson's voice was sharp. "Do it." Emeka stepped forward. His hands trembled as he picked up the marker, but his eyes burned with focus. Slowly, he turned to the whiteboard where the autopilot equations had been scrawled and crossed out again and again. He read them once. Then twice. Then, with a deep breath, he began to write. The squeak of the marker filled the silence. Emeka's script was messy but precise, the hand of a man who had solved problems in the dark with nothing but scraps of paper. He erased one constant, corrected an overlooked variable, shifted a formula that had stumped PhD engineers for weeks. The executives snickered at first. "He's doodling. Ridiculous." But soon, their laughter died. Because what he wrote wasn't madness. It was truth. The correction revealed a hidden flaw in the plane's response time, something so simple yet so devastating it had slipped through every expert's eyes. Johnson's heart pounded. He grabbed his laptop, typed in the revised formula, and ran a quick simulation. The jet that had spiraled out of control in every test before, now leveled out. Perfectly stable. The room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the computer, steady as a heartbeat. Slowly, Johnson turned back to the ragged man who stood breathing heavily, marker still in hand. His voice was a whisper, half disbelief, half awe. "Who are you?" The whiteboard still glowed under the office lights, Emeka's correction written boldly across it. For the first time in weeks, the autopilot simulation had stabilized. The impossible had just been done, not by his team of PhDs, not by his board of experts, but by a ragged beggar pulled from the streets. Johnson Uche stood frozen, staring at the screen as if afraid to breathe, afraid the numbers would vanish if he blinked. His heart thudded like a drum in his chest. He had just witnessed salvation, but at what cost to his pride? Behind him, the executives shifted uncomfortably. Their laughter was gone, replaced with silent rage. None more furious than Mr. Baco, Johnson's deputy, the man who had waited years for the empire to stumble so he could seize it for himself. Baco's jaw clenched as he watched Emeka lower the marker. His eyes narrowed with cold calculation. This couldn't be allowed. If this beggar, this nobody, became Johnson's savior, then Baco's plan to topple his boss would collapse. Emeka, oblivious to the storm in Baco's mind, turned to Johnson. His voice was steady, almost defiant. "This was no accident. You've been looking at the wrong constant. The mistake was simple, but your men refused to see it. Sometimes, arrogance blinds sharper than darkness." The word stung. The executives bristled. One muttered under his breath, "Arrogant beggar." Another shook his head. But Johnson? He only nodded slowly. For the first time, he believed this man. But Baco had already made up his mind. Later that night, as the office emptied, Bako lingered in the shadows. His phone buzzed with a single message from an international competitor. Status? His fingers flew across the screen. Correction achieved. Sending formula now. He snapped a photo of Emika's solution on the whiteboard, then deleted the evidence. A cruel smile tugged at his lips. Let Johnson believe he had found hope. Tomorrow, the rivals would unveil the same correction, and the world would laugh at him for trusting a beggar. Johnson would fall, and Bako would rise. But he wasn't careful enough. Because Emika was still in the building. He had retreated to the corner of the lobby, where the night janitors barely noticed him, hunched over his old satchel, scribbling fresh calculations by the dim light. And from the shadows, he saw it all. Bako snapping photos. Bako whispering into his phone. Bako's satisfied smirk. Emika's eyes hardened. His grip on the pencil tightened until it snapped in two. He whispered to himself, his voice low, like an oath carved in stone. So it wasn't just neglect. It was betrayal. The same man who signed away my wife's life is now selling this empire piece by piece. He rose slowly, his wet shoes squeaking on the marble floor. His heart no longer carried fear or hunger. It carried something sharper, vengeance. The world had taken everything from him. But tonight, standing in the very building that destroyed him, Emika knew his time had come. He looked up at Johnson's glass office, where the billionaire sat in exhaustion, unaware of the knives circling in the dark. And for the first time, the beggar smiled. The rain had stopped by dawn, leaving the city washed but heavy with humidity. Johnson Uche hadn't slept. He sat in his office, staring at the corrected equations still shining on the whiteboard, replaying the night in his mind. The beggar. The correction. The truth. He didn't know whether to feel relief, or fear. Downstairs in the lobby, Emika sat on a bench with his satchel on his lap. The guards gave him strange looks, whispering, "Why is he still here?" But Johnson had ordered them to let him be. Something in the billionaire's gut told him this man wasn't finished yet. Finally, Johnson came down. His tie was still loose, his eyes red from fatigue. He stood before Emika and asked the question that had haunted him all night. "Who are you?" Emika looked up slowly. His beard was wet, his eyes bloodshot, but his voice came steady, like a man who had carried the same truth for years. "You don't recognize me, do you?" Not even a flicker. Johnson frowned. He studied the man's face, the lines, the tired eyes. Nothing clicked. So Emika opened the satchel and pulled out a faded employee ID card. The photo was younger, cleaner, with sharper eyes and no beard. But the name was clear, Emika Okafor, Aerospace Engineer, Flight Systems Division. Johnson froze. You worked here." Emika's laugh was bitter, hollow. "I didn't just work here. I bled for this company. I wrote code for your autopilot systems. I sat in this very building, fighting to keep the jets safe, while you dined with ministers and made speeches about innovation." Johnson's throat tightened. He tried to speak, but Emika's voice cut sharper. "You want to know how I ended up in the gutter? It wasn't fate. It wasn't laziness. It was betrayal. From inside these walls." His hands trembled as he pulled another paper from the satchel, a yellowed hospital bill. "My wife, she was dying. Cancer. I begged the company for help. I had medical insurance. I had a family plan. But then a memo came down, cost-cutting, no more coverage for employees below senior management. Guess whose signature was on that policy?" Johnson's eyes widened. Emika's voice broke as he spat the name. "Bako." The world seemed to tilt. Emika's eyes glistened, but his jaw was set with iron. "My wife was denied treatment. She died in my arms because men like him wanted fatter bonuses. After the funeral, I broke. I drank. I lost my job. They blacklisted me, branded me unstable. And when I had nothing left, the same company I helped build left me on the street to rot. Johnson staggered back as if the words were blows. He shook his head, whispering, I didn't know. Emeka leaned forward, his voice cold. Of course you didn't know. You trusted them. You let snakes like Bako whisper into your ear while men like me buried their wives. That's your mistake, Johnson. And it will destroy you if you don't correct it. Johnson's chest heaved. He wanted to defend himself, to claim ignorance, but the guilt pressed heavier than the skyscraper itself. He had built an empire on pride, and now a broken man was shoving the truth into his face. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Emeka slid the ID card back into the satchel and stood. His voice was quieter now, but edged with steel. I didn't come here for money. I came here for justice. And I will have it, with or without you. He turned to leave. But Johnson's voice, trembling and desperate, stopped him. Wait. If I stand with you, can we still save this company? Emeka turned back, his eyes burning. Save it? Yes. But first, we burn the traitors who killed it. The sun had begun to rise, pouring a pale orange glow through the glass walls of Aerospace Dynamics Limited. The city was waking, but inside the skyscraper, the air was thick with something heavier than exhaustion, guilt. Johnson Uche sat slumped at the edge of the conference table, staring at the beggar-turned engineer across from him. The name Emeka Okafor now echoed in his head like a curse. He had once been a face in his company's ranks, dismissed as expendable. And now, he was the only reason the empire hadn't collapsed overnight. Johnson cleared his throat. His voice was unsteady, almost humble. You saved me last night. You saved us. Let me help you. Emeka raised an eyebrow. His satchel sat in his lap like armor, his grip firm. Help me, he repeated, his tone sharp. Johnson nodded quickly. Yes. Whatever you need. Money. A house. Clothes. Food. This company owes you more than I can count. Allow me to make it right. Emeka laughed. A bitter, hollow sound that echoed through the marble room. He leaned forward, eyes cold, his voice dripping with scorn. Make it right? With money? Johnson flinched. Emeka slammed the satchel onto the table, spilling the faded hospital bills, old notebooks, and his broken ID card. The pages fluttered like ghosts across the polished wood. Money won't bring back my wife. Money won't erase the nights I slept in gutters while your executives fattened their wallets. You think you can buy away guilt? No, Johnson. That's your mistake. That's always been your mistake. The words hit like gunfire. Johnson's lips trembled, but no sound came out. For the first time in his life, the billionaire who controlled governments and industries found himself powerless in front of a man in rags. Emeka leaned back, his voice lower now, sharper, controlled. I don't want pity. I don't want charity. What I want is justice. Johnson frowned, struggling. Justice? What do you mean? Emeka's eyes burned. Access. Johnson blinked. Access to what? Your archives, Emeka replied firmly. Every policy. Every board decision. Every signature Bako and his cronies buried under lies. I want to see it all. Johnson's chest tightened. Those files were locked away, confidential, guarded like treasure. Only senior executives had access. Allowing this beggar into them would be madness. But then Johnson remembered the autopilot correction, the way Emeka had exposed in minutes what his entire board had failed to see. He thought of Bako's smug smirk, his blind trust in snakes, his whispered cry for help only hours earlier. Slowly, Johnson nodded. If that's what it takes to keep this company alive, you'll have it. But Emeka, his voice broke. If I give you that access, what will you do? Emeka's lips curled into something that was not quite a smile. It was sharper, darker. I'll do what you couldn't do, Johnson. I'll hold the traitors accountable. One by one. Piece by piece. I'll strip them bare until they feel what I felt. Johnson's stomach twisted. This was no request for redemption. This was a declaration of war. But before he could speak again, Emeka's voice hardened, sealing the terms. I'll help you save your empire. But not until we destroy the men who poisoned it. That is my price. If you cannot pay it, then I walk, and you watch everything crumble. The room fell into silence. The billionaire and the beggar stared at each other, the weight of a new alliance pressing between them. Not a partnership built on trust, but on necessity. And for the first time in Johnson's life, he realized he wasn't in control anymore. The archives were buried deep in the belly of the skyscraper, behind steel doors that only a few executives could unlock. Johnson himself hadn't stepped into that room in years. He always left it to Baco and the others, men he thought were loyal, men he thought carried his vision. Now, with trembling hands, he pressed his thumb to the scanner and led Emeka inside. The air smelled of dust and stale paper. Rows of cabinets stretched like a graveyard, each drawer stuffed with decisions that had shaped lives, destroyed families, and built empires. Emeka's eyes burned as he stepped forward, his satchel clutched tight. This was it. The place where his life had been signed away with the stroke of a pen. Johnson hovered near the door, his chest heavy with guilt. You'll find what you're looking for, he muttered, though his voice shook. Emeka didn't answer. He dug through folders with shaking hands, pulling out memos, insurance reports, cost-cutting directives. The more he read, the more his jaw clenched. There it was, stamped in black and white, the policy that stripped lower-level employees of medical coverage. His wife's death sentence, written on company letterhead. And at the bottom, Baco's signature. But it didn't end there. Emeka pulled another file, then another. Fraudulent contracts, secret kickbacks, offshore accounts. Patterns of betrayal so wide they weren't mistakes, they were a system. Executives had been bleeding the company for years, carving out fortunes while Johnson gave speeches about innovation. They'd sold designs to competitors, sabotaged projects, and covered their tracks with carefully staged failures. Emeka's breathing grew ragged. His hands trembled, not from weakness, but from rage. He shoved the papers across the table toward Johnson. Look at it. All of it. They didn't just betray me. They've been betraying you, this company, this country. For years. Johnson's hands shook as he skimmed the documents. The truth struck like a hammer. Every boardroom laugh, every fake smile, every time Baco patted his shoulder and said, "Trust me, sir," it had all been lies. He had been nothing but a puppet in his own empire. Johnson sank into a chair, covering his face with his hands. My God! What have I done? I let them, his voice cracked, and for the first time, the billionaire sobbed openly. But Emeka didn't flinch. His eyes were hard, sharp, unyielding. Crying won't bring back the dead. It won't give families back their homes. But we can make them pay. You want redemption? Then stand with me, and I'll show you how to turn their betrayal into their downfall. Johnson looked up slowly, his cheeks wet. How? Emeka leaned in close, his voice low and deliberate. They trust Baco. He's their leader. He leaks secrets to rivals, thinking he'll rise when you fall. So we'll give him exactly what he craves, secrets. False ones. Blueprints that look perfect, but will collapse in their hands. He'll deliver them, and when they fail, the world will see the traitors for what they are. Johnson swallowed hard. The plan was brutal. Risky. But for the first time, he saw a way forward. Not just to save the company, but to destroy the snakes that had coiled around it. Emeka slid the damning files back into his satchel. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. You gave them power. Now we'll take it back. Not with bullets. With truth. Truth so sharp it will cut deeper than any knife. Johnson rose slowly, his eyes locked on Emeka's. For the first time since the storm began, the billionaire and the beggar stood as allies. Uneasy allies, bound by necessity, guilt, and a thirst for justice. And somewhere in the building above, Bako laughed on the phone with his foreign partners, certain his plan was working. Certain Johnson was finished. But he had no idea the trap had already been set. The boardroom was full by mid-morning. The city's top executives, engineers, and shareholders filed into their seats, the tension in the air sharp enough to cut. Bako strutted in last, polished and smug, his cologne clouding the room. He adjusted his cufflinks and flashed a smile at Johnson as though the company wasn't hanging by a thread. Johnson sat at the head of the table, shoulders heavy but eyes sharp. Beside him, Emeka leaned against the wall, ragged clothes out of place among tailored suits. The executives exchanged sneers and whispers. Why is he here? One muttered. This is madness, another scoffed. Bako cleared his throat dramatically. Gentlemen, he began, last night we witnessed a performance. A beggar with a chalkboard trick. But real business requires real professionals. Fortunately, I have secured an alternative. His grin widened. A rival firm has expressed interest in partnering with us. They are impressed with our data and ready to fund a joint launch. We will not sink after all. Johnson's stomach churned. He said nothing, letting Bako bask in his moment. Emeka's eyes, however, never left the man's hands, the way he tapped his pen with restless confidence. A snake too sure of its own poison. A large screen flickered on. Charts, diagrams, and projections filled the boardroom. The rival company's executives appeared by video call, smiling with rehearsed charm. We've reviewed the corrected blueprints, their spokesman declared. The design is sound. We believe it will put us ahead of the Americans. The board erupted in applause. Some clapped Bako on the back, whispering, "Brilliant, you saved us, we owe you." But Johnson's face remained still. He looked down the table and said quietly, "Run the test." The room hushed. Engineers tapped on keyboards, feeding the leaked blueprint into the simulator. The screen changed to a virtual cockpit. The jet soared, steady at first, then hit turbulence. For a few tense seconds, the autopilot held. Then, without warning, the system collapsed. The jet spun violently, nosediving into catastrophic failure. The simulator froze. Red lights flashed across the board. Critical error. Silence. Then chaos. What is this? Impossible. The design was perfect. The rival company's spokesman on the screen went pale. He cut the call abruptly, leaving only static. Executives turned, eyes wide, suspicion rising. Bako stammered, "No, no, there must be a mistake. Someone tampered with." Johnson slammed his hand on the table, his voice thunderous. Enough. The room fell silent. He rose slowly, his gaze sweeping across every face. This company has been rotting from within. And tonight, the stench has been exposed. He turned toward Emeka, who stepped forward and dropped a stack of files onto the table. Papers spilled out, memos, contracts, bank statements, hospital bills. Evidence, damning and undeniable. Emeka's voice was calm, almost cold. Your deputy didn't just betray him. He betrayed all of you. Sold secrets to rivals. Signed away lives for bonuses. My wife was one of them. She died because of a policy he wrote. And how many others? Gasps filled the room. Executives flipped through the documents, their faces draining of color. The hospital bills. The offshore transfers. The memo with Baco's signature. Johnson's eyes blazed. He pointed at his deputy. "Arrest him." Security burst into the room, guns at their hips. Baco's polished confidence shattered. He scrambled back, shouting, "You can't do this. I built this company too. You'll collapse without me." His voice cracked as guards grabbed his arms. He thrashed, sweat pouring down his temples. "You'll regret this, Johnson. You'll." His words were cut short as the guards dragged him out. The boardroom was silent except for the sound of papers rustling. Every man and woman in that room had seen the truth. They weren't safe either. If Emeka could expose Baco, he could expose them all. Johnson turned to the others, his voice sharp as steel. "From this day forward, betrayal will not be hidden behind suits and titles. If you have sold this company, if you have stolen from it, if you have sacrificed lives for greed, you will be found, and you will fall." He looked at Emeka then. Not as a beggar. Not as an outcast. But as a man who had just ripped the mask off his empire. Emeka's voice broke the silence, steady and cutting. "This is only the beginning. The rest of you are next." The press conference was meant to be a victory parade. Johnson's PR team had called every major network, every journalist hungry for blood or glory. The company needed to show strength after weeks of rumors. The hall was draped with banners, cameras stood like watchmen, and rows of bright lights burned down on the stage where Johnson was to stand. But when the curtain lifted, there were two men at the podium. One in a navy suit, polished shoes, the image of wealth. The other in a threadbare shirt, trousers frayed at the seams, a satchel at his feet. The room buzzed. Reporters whispered furiously. "Why is there a beggar beside the billionaire?" Johnson raised his hand for silence. His voice carried the weight of exhaustion but also resolve. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard rumors. You've read the lies. Today, you'll hear the truth. Our company faced collapse. Our planes faced ruin. And none of my board, none of my executives, could solve the problem. But this man," he turned, gesturing toward Emeka. "This man saved us." Cameras flashed like lightning. The press surged forward, microphones thrust out. "Who is he? Is this true? What's his name?" Emeka stepped to the microphone, his eyes scanning the crowd. For the first time in years, he was not invisible. He could feel the weight of every camera, every pen, every whisper. His voice came steady, deliberate. "My name is Emeka Okafor. I was once an aerospace engineer in this company. Years ago, when my wife fell ill, I begged for the medical insurance I had worked for. But your so-called leaders cut me off, because I wasn't profitable enough. She died. I lost everything. And while I slept on the streets, these men enriched themselves with bonuses and bribes." Gasps rippled through the room. Johnson's PR staff shifted nervously. But Emeka didn't stop. He opened his satchel and pulled out the yellowed files. He raised them high. "These are the documents. Policies signed by your celebrated executives. Evidence of secrets sold to rival companies. Hospital bills denied. Families ruined. Do you want the names? Here they are." He slammed the stack onto the podium. Pages scattered across the floor like confessions. Journalists dove forward, cameras snapping, eyes wide as they scanned the signatures. Baco's name. Others. Proof undeniable. One reporter shouted, "Are you saying Johnson himself approved these?" Emeka turned, locking eyes with Johnson. For a tense moment, the room held its breath. Finally, Emeka spoke. No. He was blind, arrogant, too proud to see the rot under his nose. But blindness is not innocence. His wealth shielded him from the pain his men caused. And today, that shield is broken. The hall exploded with shouts. Is the company finished? Will there be arrests? What about the families? Johnson's face was pale, but he didn't interrupt. For once, he knew silence was his only dignity. Emeka leaned forward, his voice rising above the chaos. Don't measure a man by his suit or his car. Don't measure him by the speeches he gives or the empire he builds. Measure him by what he allows in the shadows. And in those shadows, this company became a graveyard. My wife is buried in that graveyard. And so are the lives of countless others. The room erupted in flashes, the story spreading before their eyes. Investors watching live feeds froze. Share prices wavered. Across the city, across the world, people gasped as the narrative shifted from "Billionaire's comeback" to "Homeless man exposes corporate rot." Johnson finally spoke, his voice low, almost breaking. The men responsible have been arrested. There will be justice. But Emeka cut him off, his tone sharp as a blade. Justice? It has only just begun. The world now knows who you protected, who you trusted, who you allowed to thrive while men like me died in the dark. Let every traitor hear this, you will not hide behind your wealth any longer. We are dragging you into the light. Reporters shouted over each other, their cameras flashing non-stop. Emeka stepped back, his satchel on his shoulder once more, and walked off the stage without another word. He had said enough. The truth had been unleashed, and it could not be buried again. Behind him, Johnson stood frozen at the podium, a billionaire humbled in front of the world. The fallout came fast and merciless. By nightfall, every major network carried Emeka's words on a loop. His face, bearded, weathered, tired, filled TV screens, splashed across newspapers, trending on every feed. The beggar who corrected the billionaire. But headlines quickly turned darker: executives betray company. Families denied medical care. Blood on their hands. The government moved quicker than anyone expected. Investigators raided offices, seized servers, froze accounts. What they found was worse than even Emeka had imagined. Offshore accounts fattened with stolen contracts. Millions siphoned from safety budgets. Insurance policies cancelled to inflate profit margins. And names, too many names, scribbled on the bottom of every dirty document. Bako was the first to fall. Hauled from his mansion in handcuffs, his face plastered on every front page. His neighbors jeered as police cars lined his gates. His wife's jewels, his children's private school fees, his fleet of cars. All funded by the blood of workers who had died without care. Emeka's wife had been one of them. Now the world knew. In court, Bako's voice cracked as he begged for leniency. It wasn't just me. The whole board signed those policies. But his pleas only dragged others into the fire. Executives who had sneered at Emeka now found themselves cornered, their names read aloud in packed courtrooms, their assets seized. Men who once dined with presidents now stood behind bars, their suits traded for prison uniforms. Investors abandoned them. Their families turned on them. One by one, reputations collapsed like sandcastles under a wave. And Emeka? He didn't raise a fist. He didn't need to. His revenge was sharper, truth, public and undeniable, carving their legacies into shame. Johnson survived, but scarred. He faced inquiries, brutal questions, sleepless nights replaying every decision that had blinded him. The world now saw him not as untouchable, but as a man who let monsters feed under his roof. His empire shrank, his pride shattered. And yet, he endured, because Emeka had chosen not to destroy him. Not yet. Emeka visited the courthouse steps only once, standing silently as Bako was dragged past, pale and trembling. Their eyes met. For years, Emeka had dreamed of this moment, to spit, to curse, to strike. But instead, he whispered only 4 words, low enough that only Baco heard. "You buried her alive." Baco collapsed into the police car, tears streaking his face. Across the city, families who had lost loved ones to those ruthless policies began to sue. Mothers who had buried children. Fathers who had died untreated. Their voices, long ignored, now had fuel. And every lawsuit traced back to the same men Emeka had exposed. The punishment was total. Fortunes lost. Legacies ruined. Names once spoken with respect now hissed like curses. And still, Emeka was not finished. For revenge is not complete when the guilty fall. It is complete when the forgotten rise. That night, sitting in the same rain-soaked spot where he had first heard Johnson's desperate cry, Emeka opened his satchel one last time. He pulled out his wife's faded photograph, the corners curled, her smile soft. He held it against his chest and whispered, "It's done. They will never bury another family like they buried us." The beggar had torn down an empire of betrayal without lifting a sword. Only truth, exposed to the light, had been enough to end them. And for the first time in years, Emeka felt not rage, not grief, but something he thought had died with her, peace. Months passed. The storm of trials and headlines began to fade, but the scars remained. Baco and his circle rotted in prison cells, their fortunes seized, their families scattered. The empire they built on betrayal was rubble. Johnson survived, but he was no longer the untouchable billionaire who once believed his signature was law. He walked slower now, his voice quieter, his pride cracked. Every boardroom decision reminded him of the night a beggar corrected his mistake and dragged his sins into the light. He had wealth, yes, but the shine of it was dulled forever by guilt. And Emeka? He no longer slept under kiosks. He didn't take the mansions Johnson offered or the black cars lined with leather. He asked for one thing instead, a building. Not in the rich part of town, but on the edge of the slums where children with sharp eyes and empty stomachs wandered without hope. The building became a workshop. Its walls rang not with boardroom laughter but with chalk against blackboards, with the hum of broken radios taken apart, with young voices asking questions Emeka once scribbled to himself in the dark. Every morning, Emeka arrived with his satchel. Inside were the same notebooks, the same faded bills, the same photograph of his wife. He would set them on the desk and begin, teaching equations, teaching aerodynamics, teaching resilience. These children had no money, no status, no polished shoes. But they had what the world ignored, raw brilliance. Johnson visited once. He stood at the doorway, watching a boy of 12 sketching wings on scrap paper with the same fire Emeka once had. For a moment, Johnson's throat tightened. He realized then what his billions had blinded him to all along: genius does not live in marble offices. It lives in the hearts the world refuses to see. Emeka noticed him lingering and said without looking up, "Wealth builds machines. But only humility builds legacies. You came close to losing both." Johnson nodded, unable to reply. He slipped away quietly, leaving a silent donation that rebuilt the roof and bought new desks. But his name was never carved into the wall. Only Emeka's remained, written in chalk by the students themselves. One evening, after the children had gone, Emeka sat alone at the desk. He opened his satchel and pulled out his wife's photograph. He set it under the soft glow of the bulb and whispered, "They will never forget you. Your death will feed every life I lift from this place." He leaned back, closing his eyes, and for the first time in years, his chest felt light. His revenge was complete, not because his enemies had fallen, but because the forgotten now had a chance to rise. The world would remember him not as a beggar, not as a broken man, but as the one who corrected not only a billionaire's mistake but the pride that built it. And as the lights of Lagos twinkled against the night sky, his words lingered like a final verdict. The greatest correction I ever made wasn't on an aircraft. It was on a man's heart.